In our recent videos, we've been looking at settlement in North America, and we looked at Virginia, we looked at Jamestown, that was the first one. Then we looked at the Puritans and the Pilgrims, and they were way up in New England. And now, during this whole period, the early 1600s to, let's say, 1680s, other areas in North America were being settled, and we're going to look at those now. The one specific area we're going to look at are what we call the middle colonies. You have Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, those are your New England. And under that, we have these colonies that we call the middle, and then we have the southern colonies that we will be looking at. Your middle colonies are New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. So there's 4 middle colonies. And as Massachusetts was being established, and Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, these colonies were also being colonized and established. And we're going to be looking at those. Just like we started out with the New England colonies talking to you about the environment really dictates the lifestyle. And so the middle colonies' environments were very different than the New England ones. The middle colonies had lots of fertile soil, lots of good farmland, well suited for wheat and fruits and vegetables. It had a warmer climate. It was farther south, a longer growing season. They didn't have, the winters were not as long. They had great natural resources, very good rivers, very good waterways, natural bays, wonderful harbors, and manufacturing, great manufacturing with all these resources, the harbors to trade and send goods out, the resources here to grow and produce things, and then a lot of manufacturing developed so they could take the raw resources, they could produce something with them, and then ship them out and sell them, trade, and make money. New York. New York, as England was founding their colonies, and England started out with Jamestown, and then we have Massachusetts. The Dutch founded in 1623 by the Dutch West Indies Company. They founded a settlement in what we know today as New York. And so here's Long Island, and here is New Amsterdam. This is where New York City is today. So New York City was really founded by the Dutch, and the Dutch had claimed this area, they claimed the Hudson River, claimed all this, and this was all, it was called New Netherlands, and it was part of the Dutch government claimed this land. Manhattan was purchased by the Dutch, Manhattan Island, from the Native Americans for $23. It was formed, now, how did we go from New Netherland to New York? It was formerly called New Netherland, it was set up by the Dutch, and the Dutch were very tolerant. They allowed all sorts of religions there. They were very open to religious freedom. In 1664, England takes over, and the king gave the land to his brother, the Duke of York. And that is how New York got named New York, after the Duke. England went in there and they kind of surrounded the Dutch settlement and said, well, we're to the north of you and we're to the south of you in Jamestown. You're not staying here. And so they surrounded it with troops, and the Dutch governor said, okay, it's yours, I give. So, the one thing about New York, it was very diverse. It attracted people from many, many places. There was a lot of tolerance there. That's very different than New England. And here, the next one we're going to look at is New Jersey. So here's New York, there's New York City, New Amsterdam, the Hudson River, and we're going to be looking at New Jersey. Governor Carteret arrives in New Jersey. They took over that land also, and he comes, and here, this is a drawing of him working with the people who have already settled there, and saying, I'm the governor now, we're going to work with the Native Americans, and we're going to work with you. New Jersey, the Duke of York knew that New York was too big to rule, so he gave land to his friends, Lord Berkeley and Lord Carteret. He called the proprietary colony, remember, Carteret and Berkeley, they were now proprietors. He gave them that land and said, you control it. He called the proprietary colony New Jersey. In 1702, it became a royal colony because these two gentlemen lost the control of it and the king took control back. So that's the difference between a proprietary colony, someone else is the proprietor, they're given permission to run and use it, and then a royal colony is when the king has the final authority, say, and control. William Penn, Pennsylvania. William Penn received a grant from the king to establish the colonies, a colony. He was a strong, strong Quaker, not part of the Church of England. And Quakers are, one of their tenets, or one of the main things to their faith is nonviolence. They will not fight back. They will refuse to fight in wars. If you are a Quaker, you can get permission not to, if there was a draft, to be in the army due to your religious beliefs. He named his colony Pennsylvania. It was Penn's woodland because it was covered with forests. He had a land policy that attracted people from all over Europe. His policy was much more liberal. It gave people who normally would not be able to settle, buy land, and get their wealth from owning land, because that's what made you wealthy back then, to come and work the land. And so he drew people from all over Europe. The other thing he really approached the Native Americans much different. He insisted, and it was the law, that you had to buy the land from the Native Americans. You had to negotiate the price, you had to give them an honorable and fair price. So he had a totally different viewpoint. He was not ethnocentric. We talked about that earlier, that he was better, and he treated them equal. And that very much is part of his faith. Representative Assembly, elected by landowners. Though he was running the colony, he wanted people's input, so they had the assembly. Everybody had the freedom to worship as they please, as opposed to the New England colonies. This attracted many different kinds of people. In his colony, there was no provision for military defense. He believed in nonviolence. He was not going to fight back. And so there was no military in Pennsylvania. And the other thing, there was absolutely no slavery. Remember, Jamestown in 1619, the first slaves were brought over. Those slaves were needed as tobacco. We looked at the growth of tobacco in the video about Jamestown. And William Penn would have none of it. He would have no slaves in his colony. He also had what they call blue laws. These were against stage plays, cards, dice, and excessive hilarity. Even though he was much more liberal than the Puritans, the idea of just laying around, entertainment, investing your time in playing cards and dice and those things, as opposed to being a hard worker, was very much frowned against. A society that his society gave citizens economic opportunity, civil liberty, where they could choose and practice and do things as they wanted, and religious freedom. So William Penn understood that this colony, the roots of the colony and the ideas of how the colony should run, more tolerance, more inclusion, was very different than any other colonies established. Then the last colony is Delaware. Very small. It was first settled by the Swedes. So this gives you an idea as we're establishing Jamestown, England's establishing Jamestown, Puritans and Pilgrims in New England. We had the Swedes trying to establish a place in North America. We have the Dutch. These other countries in Europe are competing for land. It was first settled by the Swedes. It was a part of Pennsylvania, but it was too far for them to send their delegates to the legislature in Pennsylvania to meet. So Penn allowed them to elect their own assembly, and they broke away to form a separate colony. So it was just the distance, the lack of roads, the inability to communicate, the expediency of within, and you might say in a sense in the neighborhood, dealing with your own things. So those are the 4 middle colonies. Here's some general details. Much easier to farm. We talked about this earlier. Milder weather. It could produce a huge surplus of food. So they had cash crops that they could sell. So you could make more money. The towns were less important because houses were farther apart. It was the farming that made it very significant. So you had farm after farm, and there weren't as many towns as there were in New England. In the western section of Pennsylvania, called the backcountry, the frontier region, this is the frontier region extending through a lot of different colonies. It really is the foothills along the Appalachian. So you had that backcountry being established. Most of the middle colonies, they were populated from people all over. It wasn't just people from England who believed in the same faith. People from different countries. From Scotland, Ireland, the Scotch-Irish, and Germans. Germans in German are called Dutch. Dutch. And Americanized, that was called Dutch. And so they were the Germans there, and there's the huge communities of Germans that moved into Pennsylvania. They were called the Pennsylvania Dutch. These colonies were much more diverse, a lot of different ideas. So make sure you've taken your notes, bring them to class. You always can expect a quiz.